Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to be going over what I believe to be one of the new best leveling specs for Necromancer by a long shot. So, if you are unfamiliar with the history of, Necromancer leveling builds, most of them revolved around utilizing Volatile Zombie. And the idea here is you would summon a bunch of zombies, spam cast speed and mana regen, and go from there. That's usually what most people do. Now, of course, this has gotten way better with the recent patch, thanks to the additions of a few things. But before we get into that, I would heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that is the best way of supporting work like this on YouTube. And you can also, of course, check out my Twitch streams as well if you're interested in seeing me do this work live. So, the whole concept of this build, this version of the leveling spec for Necromancer, is we summon a really big zombie. Obviously, if you don't know, Giant Zombie was buffed like significantly for self-cast. So the idea what happened was they made it so that you can't summon big zombies reliably off of indirect casts like the potion and like cycles of putrescence, but it makes them significantly better for self-cast, like miles better, because they reduce the mana cost by like 3 times or something like that. Yeah, like casting a zombie, or I think it's like half. Casting a zombie no longer chugs your mana when you have Giant Zombie allocated. And this is absolutely insane for us because it allows us to sustain the mana while also doing damage in a very large AoE. As you can tell, Giant Zombie does damage in a very, very big AoE. And this is compounded on top of the stationary node that gives us 20% more damage and more AoE. Now, you must be wondering, Dread, that should not be enough to make this work. And you are correct. There's another piece to the puzzle, and that is chaos bolts, or whatever it's called. And there's a node inside of it that called volatile rekindling that makes it so that whenever you hit a zombie with a chaos bolt, it will deal damage in a larger area and for more damage. Now, I have plans for this later on. That's actually why I'm leveling this character, is I have plans for this node specifically. But essentially, this makes it so that we can detonate our zombies for us. And this is really good because, as you can tell, we're compounding more damage modifiers, right? So we take this more damage modifier, and there's a more damage modifier after this that not only gives our zombies chance to apply poison up to 300%, it also gives us even more AoE and more damage. And all of this combined means, as you can tell, a very, very, very big explosion. Michael Bay would be very proud. So there's a few other things that we do. We abuse the fact that we're applying a bunch of poisons by utilizing the node inside Aura of Decay. That gives us 75% more poison damage whenever the minions are nearby us. And of course, as you know, with the zombies, they summon at your feet, so they're always by us when we summon them. Now, the only problem with this build is it is commonly referred to what I call a 2-button build, meaning that you need to press zombie, then you need to press chaos bolts. This might turn off some people, but this is significantly better leveling than everything else Necromancer has going for it. So essentially, you just suck it up and just get good at that point, to be honest. Not to be rude or anything, but at this time, it seems like as though this is the best leveling spec for Necromancer of all time. Like, I'll be honest, I've been playing for the past 4 years, and this is by far the smoothest like Necromancer leveling experience I've ever had. Actually, the smoothest experience ever. Like, for instance, if you're playing like Bone Golem, right, you'd have to sit there casting your rip blood constantly while I clear. With this, it's insane. The AoE hits almost the whole screen. I'm just walking through monoliths killing stuff. Like, Jesus Christ, dude. Like, this is probably like one of the strongest leveling builds I've ever made. So yeah, yeah, we're gonna go in game and we're gonna talk about it more in detail. It's gonna be a little bit different because we're gonna be looking at planners and stuff like that. So if you haven't already, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. And we're gonna go in game and talk about this in more in detail. Bye. All right, so here we are in planner. This is going to be the transitionary period, level 1 to 16, 16 transition, up to level 42, then level 55 transition. So let's talk about the build in detail and how I leveled it. So from levels 1 to 16, you're just going to utilize the normal setup of Wandering Spirits into Hungering Souls. Why is that? Well, Hungering Souls gives you a very large amount of more damage multiplier versus Possessed, and then of course Wandering Spirits just gives you a lot of more damage in clear and on single target. This probably do that, by the way, instead. But this combined means early on you're going to have a lot of free clear, and while you're doing this, you're also going to be maintaining skeletons and bone golem. All of this combined makes it so that you have really good single target early on, and your clear is okay-ish. It's not like the best clear ever, but it's like good enough to get you through, and that should be good enough to carry you until level 16, because level 16 is when you get access. Oh, by the way, of course, these will all be in the description if you want to look at them in more detail, because that's when we get access to summon zombies. So we swap over to summon zombie. Right now we run transplant with, of course, haste and frenzy. Then we run summon volatile zombie, and we start trying to chuck that mana cost, right? Trying to make it so that mana cost as summon volatile zombie is nowhere near annoying, right? That's great and all, and we're just gonna level like this for just a little bit, right? We're gonna have summon bone golem up and stuff like that, and then later on here we're gonna look at the level 42 planner. We've completely changed our game plan. So between level 16 and 42 you're gonna make this transition where you're swapping transplant for summon bone golem. The reason why you do this is because early on, as these kinds of builds, your sustain is what I would like to call poo-poo. So you run around with hunger on your bone golem and run with blood golem. This makes it so he summons sanguine orbs, which does a bunch of hits, kind of like ball lightning from Path of Exile. And this on top of all the health gain on hit, this keeps you sustained early on, which makes it so you don't feel like garbage while playing through the game. Now, of course, later on you're going to ditch this, but we'll talk about that in a moment. And then summon volatile zombie here. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be focusing on getting into giant zombie. It will increase the mana cost, but it gives you more area and more damage, which is great. And then you're going to be grabbing the more damage here, of course, the more damage here, and of course the stationary zombies here as well. And that's great, right? In that order. But then you're also going to take 5 points into Warlock as soon as you can, spec into Chaos Bolts, and then get to Volatile Kindling and then Sudden Putrescence as quickly as possible. This is going to make it so that when you are playing the game, right, you just do this, pop, this, pop, this, pop, and it's going to make you feel like a god. And the hit damage on Summon Volatile Zombie early on does not fall off until like maybe Reign of Dragons, and by then you're going to have a bunch of ailment stuff, which we'll talk about in a moment. Now, of course, we're going to be swapping over from Bone Golem once we get our passive points all the way to Dreadshade. We're going to be swapping out getting some passive points here into Lich, and we're going to be swapping out Bone Golem for Aura of Decay. Aura of Decay gives us two things. First things off, it gives us the missing life healed, which allows us to sustain ourselves, which we didn't have access to earlier. It gives us access to Plague Bears, which is an extra 100% poison chance for our minions. And also, eventually, you'd want to grab 75% more damage with Aura of Decays, with nearby poison damage, right? That's great. That's like wonderful. It's going to boost your damage significantly. Then you're also going to get the Dread Shade stuff set up with the Symbiotic Apparition, Fear, Enemy of My Enemies, Grim Fate, and then eventually Volgas. That's going to give you a very large chunk of damage on single target. And of course, while you're clearing, your Aura of Decay just gives you passive damage, which is great. And then of course, you're just going to keep some of your zombies. Eventually, you're going to be grabbing points in Army of Rot for even more poison chance, then eventually into Path of Destruction for, of course, AoE. And that's going to be it for the leveling. And we're going to talk about the finished product here in game. The planners will be in the description, though, still, by the way. So, let's talk about the finished product. So we didn't make any changes for the most part. I'm pretty happy with what we did here. One thing I will note is after you do get Chaos Bolts, one thing I would suggest investing into is Chains of the Betrayer. So the problem with normal Chaos Bolts is they're very, as the name implies, chaotic. And what we want to do is we want to be consistent. So I had the problem where I was running through the campaign and I'd be like this, and that wouldn't kill my zombie, right? Now, obviously, I gotta aim just a little bit, but it's significantly easier to aim the big bolt than it is to aim, like, of course, a bunch of small bolts. Now, there is a version of this. Now, we do run into single target mana problems. We run a bunch of mana regen to counteract the mana costs of these skills, but there is a theory. What you could do is you could run Devour the Damned and then run, like, with the extra projectiles. That would give us a little bit of mana sustain on single target as long as we curse the enemy through utilizing stuff like Bone Curse or whatever, or using the Bone Curse note here. Either way, you can curse the enemy and then, get extra mana on hit. But the problem is, like I said, is I prefer the consistency of the big bolt. You guys can try out the Devour the Damned if you want, but I like the big bolt, and I cannot lie. So that's pretty much it for the leveling in that regard. For gearing, is getting plus levels of Volatile Zombie, mana regen in every slot, mana regen here, healing effectiveness, mana regen, mana regen. You want to get as much mana regen, cast speed, minion damage, stuff like that. HP as well to make your Aura of Decay, because the way the Aura of Decay works is it based on missing HP. So this scales with your HP. The more HP you have, the more sustain you have, meaning that you want to be stacking as much life early on as possible. Thankfully, Necromancer makes this pretty easy by utilizing stuff like Tyrant to give it a large amount of percent HP and stuff like that. It's like cast speed, healing effectiveness, right? Minion damage. My idols are just like whatever I can fucking shove in terms of resistances. And for the weapon, that actually buffed us significantly. I'm talking like multiple folds, as you can tell here. That is a lot of mana regen. That is 5 mana regen per second just from the weapon alone. So we utilize the mana regen mana affix hybrid. Then, of course, we damage over time for minions. This is, you want to be using a two-handed weapon with these modifiers, mainly just the mana regen and the damage over time for minions. This is very important for your leveling because not only does it give you sustain on single target, because that's going to be your main single target like bottleneck for a little bit, while also, of course, giving us a large amount of percent damage, allowing us to scale those ailments into the end game and to the point where, like, we can zoom to end game content. But that's going to be it for me today. With all that being said, this has been Dread. Off to go do something else. Bye.